Okay, great. I'm gonna run down the roll. Samantha Albert.
Morning.
Good morning, Samantha. Pat Dorsey. Christina Bury.
Morning.
Good morning, Christina. Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally.
Present.
Good morning, Commissioner. Mark Morgan let me know he was not going to be able to attend. Julie Stitzel.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, Julie. And Commissioner Veronica Medina also let me know that she was not going to be able to make it. And then Allison Lurch.
Present.
Good morning, Allison.
Do we have just enough for quorum, barely?
Yes, we have one over quorum. So
Awesome. Great. Thank you all for being here today. And again, apologize. It has been amazing 24 hours. But I don't know if you read some of those bills from the Shell game, and one of them was impacting emergency services. So unfortunately, we were able to advocate in that space. But let's move on to our agenda. We have a great speaker today. I'm looking forward to this presentation discussion. But first, let's approve the minutes. Or we didn't have them attached yet, right? They're not attached. So we're just going to move on to our presentation. If I turn off my camera at any time, it's just because it's special session and things are moving fast and we're having to make decisions. So if I do that, I apologize. I'll be right back. And but just know that like last night, I had literally two phones for a half hour straight out of this other meeting, and I'm just trying to respond to people's questions as we're in the special session. So I appreciate your patience and understanding. So Courtney, would you like, or Allison, would you like to introduce Julie? And let's get rolling. Thank you. And if I switch cameras, I'm trying to get my computer to behave. Thanks.
I can introduce Julie by name. Julie Shapiro works with the Keystone Policy Institute, and I know she's been a big part of this group that's been meeting the Wildfire and Watershed Initiative for Resilient Colorado, and we're really grateful to have Julie here. She also spoke to the Leveraging Resources Committee on Monday, and she gave a really wonderful presentation. So I'm excited for this group to meet her. And Julie, I will let you share a little bit more about yourself and maybe what you do at Keystone, and then what the work group is and what it's doing that is related to forest health.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. I think I know almost everyone here except maybe the other Julie, who drinks coffee on Friday mornings, so I know we have something in common. And some of you are more or less involved in these conversations, so I want to make sure that we tailor the presentation that way, but also knowing that it's recorded and that other committee members who are less familiar might take a look at this later. We'll just kind of go through those basics around Wildfire and Watershed Initiative for Resilient Colorado, which is conveniently shorthanded as WORK. So it's our working initiative, our work effort. I am the Natural Resources Center Director at Keystone Policy Center, which is a nonprofit, non-advocacy organization that's been around for 50 years. We work locally, statewide, and nationally on a variety of topics, trying to help bring together different perspectives and foster common higher ground and solutions that are shared and actionable for a lot of different issues. So in natural resources, I focus on lands, water, wildlife, wildfire issues. That includes public and private lands issues, and it also intersects a lot with our agriculture team. And I've done a lot of work in private lands and agriculture over time. We also do work in tribal and indigenous engagement and education policy, and then a whole host of other issues. We are not the subject matter experts on topics, as becomes clear, I think, most of the time when we go deep on things, but we are there to support really productive and kind of action-oriented conversations. So that's a bit about me. I'm based in Summit County. I'm working from my home in Frisco right now, and our headquarters are in Keystone. We also have offices in Denver and DC. So I'll tell you a little bit about this initiative, some of its background, how it got started, what we're focused on right now, a little bit about how we're organizing ourselves as we're quickly evolving and growing. And then I have a couple slides at the end that pulls from the scoping work that we did when we did about 50 interviews and just a lot of desk-side review and good conversations with a steering team that we call our action team. And that scoping document actually highlighted a few policy challenges and solutions. So I thought that might be of most interest for this group just to pull out. And I would really love to just to hear some discussion, get some discussion going. What are you all thinking about for this upcoming legislative session, and just any connections we can make? The work effort does meet on Monday in Berthoud, and you're all invited. Julie, again, because we're just meeting, I know this is very last minute and new to you, but I'm happy to include you if you can come, or include you for the future. There's a lot of similarities, I think, and connections between what Forest Health Council is trying to do, and you'll see that in a moment as I highlight your vision. And what work is doing. It's just two different fora, right, with two different genesis in terms of where they're coming from, and the one being something created in statute and having kind of a public sector host, and work being a little bit more private sector driven, and that just offers different opportunities, I think, that we can find synergies on. So let me share my screen. I always forget in Google Meet. Be patient. There it is. There's the button. Okay. And I can share these slides after, and also that scoping document that I mentioned. So I'll just cruise through some of this again. And there again is kind of the structure for what I'll share with you. Purpose, strategies, the way we're organizing ourselves, and connections to the legislative committee. So the purpose and mission for work is to advance statewide sustainable public and private funding and other strategies to enhance the pace and scale of wildfire risk reduction and watershed resilience. A lot packed into that, but I'll really just highlight, this group really came together asking the question of what can all sectors do, and particularly how do we engage the private sector more in thinking about forest health, wildfire risk, watershed resilience. And the frame is really around pace and scale of risk reduction. So we know there's a lot of things connected to that. And of course, there's really important elements of wildfire response and recovery as well. But we're focused especially on the sustainable funding to do the risk mitigation work that then supports risk reduction, also resilience post-fire in the long run. And we really see this contributing to the 2055 vision for forest health that you all worked on, and particularly in those areas of funding and economies and industry and markets. Just a little bit on the history here. The conversations actually predated my involvement in helping to facilitate and coordinate. They started probably a year ago, maybe a little more, with some water utilities and state and federal agencies and some nonprofits who were involved in public-private landscape scale restoration projects, kind of just discussing how do we get more folks to the table. Some sectors like the water utilities are increasingly, and have been for a while though, interested in investing in risk reduction because they see that as a really important way to address risks to water supply and the things they manage, and to things that impact their customers. But the question was, how do we see others help others see themselves in terms of the own benefits they derive from risk reduction, and whether they're direct or indirect. How do we have folks thinking more about how they can engage in these topics? So back in December of 2024, Denver Water hosted a lunch just to bring a lot of business community members together and kind of seed those conversations. And that was a great kind of kickoff in getting folks more thinking about this and more engaged. There was also pretty immediate recognition the private sector is not going to solve a $1 billion problem on their own in terms of sustainable funding, but there was interest in how do we get more partnerships working and more energy around solving these issues together. And that kind of led to myself and then Ben Guillaume from Conservation Investment Management stepping up our work a little bit to support this group of folks that had come together as a kind of a steering committee and saying, where do we head next? What strategy to pursue? That is what then also led to us doing that scoping that I mentioned with interviews, and then producing this document and some ideas for strategies that this group could collectively try to move forward together through joint efforts, and also through individual efforts that are better coordinated through this forum. Of course, all of this was also happening as we had a big change in federal context. And so that's where too, the frame has shifted a little bit from just saying what can the private sector do or how to engage the private sector, but more what can we all do with our federal partners, but as non-federal partners, and trying to find solutions as federal funding and capacity have changed, and also the future remains uncertain. So that's the background which really led us to this frame that I highlighted here. And I won't spend too much time, but can leave you with these slides later. But really just, this group is anchored around this idea of we have a lot of needs that add up to a lot of dollars, and yet at the same time, proactive treatments are, worth, are good bang for your buck in terms of saving on the back end of catastrophic wildfire. And just really trying to emphasize through this effort that there's a lot of assets and geographies at risk. So we often focus on life and property, which is first and foremost, of course, but also water and energy supply and infrastructure, economies, industry, recreation, transportation, watersheds, forest health are all things of importance to this group. And so again, I've covered some of these points that just around what work is truly focused on. It sees itself as one piece of the puzzle around funding, really focused on natural environments and risk reduction and resilience, trying to elevate conversations to talking about landscape scale, while including both private and public lands and taking kind of a statewide view of what's needed, involving a lot of partners, of course. We know there's so much activity happening on this, and I'll speak to that in a little bit more depth in a few more slides. But I think by focusing on these pieces, that's where work felt like the niche and a need, particularly after the scoping that we talked about. And one last thing, watershed resilience, again, water supply and infrastructure are really important to this group. And I always put quotations around natural with talking about natural environments. We know sometimes people talk about watersheds versus community protection, but really the point is they're all interrelated. The work we do in watersheds is supporting communities and reducing risk and increasing resilience. We're just not focused as much in this group at this time on advancing funding and policy specific to home hardening and things like that, but see it as a very important piece of the puzzle and know that others are very much focused on it. This slide, again, I'll leave you with the slides for the details, but bottom line, Colorado's had great opportunities for funding that it's taken advantage of over time for federal and state funding, but we know it doesn't fully meet the need or demand, and we know there's changes. And again, private sector funding and financing can be part of the solution, but we also know that it's not the full solution. We know there's a lot of funding needs from workforce and treatment costs to some of those things that maybe we're less focused on, but we want to acknowledge WUI, harm hardening, capacity planning, innovation. We also know that funding alone can't solve everything because there's a lot of other policy and coordination and innovation and other needs that have to be addressed. So we really approached it from the question of what can sustainable funding do and what would it take to get more sustainable funding, but also what can it not do? So what do we have to think about as supportive strategies that need to be in place for funding to actually hit the ground? So now I'll just talk a little bit about some of the strategies the work effort has really honed in on, and these four are actually the strategies we'll focus on at that Monday meeting I just mentioned. Statewide public funding, local public funding, private public funding, and forest restoration economy. So statewide public funding, the conversation right now is just really around what are the opportunities for statewide non-TABOR restricted public funding measures. And I use that term loosely. What are, there could be lots of different kinds of approaches here, and that's what we're trying to explore to put more funding into important programs and at the very least meet current demand, but ideally, meet the need that's described through the Forest Action Plan and, kind of quantified as being where we most urgently need work. At the same time, there's a lot of different potential tools at local levels. They can be ballot initiatives. There's, a lot of chatter, I think, these days about forest improvement districts that are something there's authority for, but nobody's really ever used. So we're trying to help strategically think statewide about where the opportunities might be, and also just assess even where do folks have relevant funding, but it might be sunsetting. So we're trying to look broadly at the overlay of opportunity for local funding and priorities for risk reduction and resilience, and add that strategic lens. We're working with Trust for Public Land is leading that, and we're trying to provide a forum to also gather more feedback into how that's done. That'll be a topic for Monday as well. And at the same time, we know there's a lot of folks individually trying to lead efforts, so we're trying to provide a forum to learn and share. coordinate, be really smart about what those opportunities are and how lots of different players can help support them at local levels. On the private public funding side, we've talked about pooled funding opportunities. The Restore model is one example at the state level. And then of course, at the community level, there's a lot of community foundations. So we're just thinking about how we could frame additional opportunities or just increase and attract interest into opportunities for private public funding. Pooled funds are just one mechanism. We're also going to be talking a lot more about just what are all the mechanisms, like how do you engage the right audiences from the private sector for the right opportunities, and what are the different tools that might be available. There's a lot of discussion about conservation financing, and that can be really beneficial for bridge funding and revolving loans and different ways to help maybe address some of the, especially the problems of early funding or access to capital before grants and reimbursements come through. But we're talking not just about financing, but also actual funding. Money that sticks in the ground. So that's a whole host: financing, philanthropy, different opportunities. And a lot of that is also tied to thinking about how we message and talk about return on investment. Like, why would the private sector be interested? How does this impact them? And then finally, forest restoration economy. This actually started as a conversation more focused on just workforce capacity, and it's evolved to think more broadly about how do we rethink and reframe the opportunities that we have to think about how wildfire risk reduction, watershed health play into a broader economy. And that can include this, stewardship work that has really driven a lot of what we do in Colorado because of our lack of it, really valuable timber, but it's also thinking about innovation and other ways to catalyze investment pathways. So everything from the big new and, kind of sexy stuff that, we're excited about, like where can we go with new technologies, to the really basic, like we need people and chains. How do we think about how that affects local communities as well? So that's another conversation we're going to be deep diving in. And then the supporting strategies, which are very important in and of themselves, but we think about them as they're related to sustainable funding, include and how they can either support getting sustainable funding and/or how they put in place things that are really needed so that you can make the case for funding or that you can use funding. So that includes policy, which we can talk more about this morning, modern metrics, landscape scale implementation, and strategic communications. Let's talk more about policy, but this group has a whole host of actors, much like you all do, and they all have different, policy interests and also opportunities and restrictions. So really, we're just trying to have those early conversations about what is even needed, and then different actors may, in different ways, involve themselves in, policy engagement. Modern metrics, we talk a lot about acres, and we also know folks are doing great work on talking more about return on investment, risk reduction metrics. And so that's something that we know is important in terms of making the case for investment and also showing what's been done. So we'd like to talk more about what are those relevant metrics. Landscape scale implementation, again, just thinking about, this group is really thinking about not just how to do single projects on the ground, but how do you have a big impact that really does move the needle on risk reduction, and what are the policy and partnership and funding and prioritization and economy kind of considerations that all need to come together to really do landscape scale implementation effectively. So that's really an aggregator of a lot of different strategies, and we haven't cracked the nut on exactly what we're trying to do there, but we do know that we want to try to think more about how we advance landscape scale implementation, including through things like shared stewardship, good neighbor, having those economic solutions and capacity solutions, and really thinking about where the new opportunities might lie, including with this current federal administration in terms of state federal opportunities for thinking at that large scale and over longer time periods. And then finally, strategic communications. This can touch lots of different audiences, but we're trying to think about what needs to most be mobilized in order to achieve some of those other strategies above. So we're just starting to scratch the surface there. And we'll come back to all of that. Just a brief note. We know there's a lot happening and a lot of leadership happening in Colorado. I don't expect you to deep dive on this sketch of different collaborative systems in Colorado and how they're connected, but because it's also just, we know it's not a complete map, but the point is just that there's a lot of nodes and connections of folks that are doing work, and that's where we're trying to situate work as an opportunity to bring together some of those conversations and also really focus on that sustainable funding frame. Work is embracing a collective impact model. We are, that model in general just is based on the premise that large scale change requires broad cross-sector coordination, and no single entity can solve for wildfire risk reduction and watershed resilience alone. So how do we bring folks together and add value by catalyzing coordination? That could mean that everyone's working on a similar strategy together, or coming up with ideas to implement together. It can also mean that we're looking at the overall frame of, say, local funding and saying, what is everybody doing and how are we connecting and being strategic, and everyone's doing their individual work. So certainly not superseding any individual organization's own efforts or authorities. There's a few main pillars to collective impact. Common agenda, just working towards a common purpose, thinking about how are we measuring and talking about progress, what are we all doing to contribute back, and then where work, I think, really comes in, and where Keystone's role comes in, continuous communications. How do we make sure we're keeping that coordination open and supporting that with some capacity just to make it all move? And then final note on organization, which has really evolved. We went from having nothing on paper a couple of weeks ago to having a draft charter that we're working on right now. And that's, I think it's just a testimony to how quickly this is caught on, that there's just been so much interest all of a sudden in the past really just 6 weeks even alone. And so the way we think about it is a big umbrella, a big tent for anyone who's interested in the mission. We have an action team that serves in a steering capacity. We have a leadership roundtable to periodically meet at the more CEO level, just to keep that really high level interest and buy-in and commitment to the work. We're going to develop an executive committee to help us, again, at that more CEO level, just with more nimble decision making as we need to. But then really where the work gets done, especially going forward, are working groups and strategy stewards. And those big four that I mentioned up front, those are the 4 working groups that in various ways will be advancing some of this work. Okay, so on to the last couple slides. Oh, I just added these, and apparently the font is a little bit glaring. Sorry about that. These are policy challenges that we identified through those scoping interviews. And so I kind of just pulled them out and plopped them in here. So I thought it could be a good genesis for discussion. But things that came up a lot in the interviews we did, permitting time, and they might not be new to you, but just hopefully helps, as a way to bring some things together to talk about permitting timelines and complexity, especially around NEPA and prescribed burning as a deterrent to doing work. And so again, that's one example of, even if we had all the money in the world, where some of the policy bottlenecks that we need to work on. Then kind of related to that, but simplifying or aligning permitting pathways and supporting broader use of good neighbor authority or stewardship contracts. And there was a lot of feedback too there that it's not about this, say the state of Colorado kind of controlling implementation from the top down, but certainly helping to unlock the opportunities for cross-boundary work. And so that's something I think that's really relevant right now. Prescribed burning liability, we know, we're super aware of the really great work that the prescribed burning group did in putting out that report and identifying a whole host of opportunities and needs. And so that's, this is just scratching the surface of that, but just kind of putting a pin in those needs. Also, just there's this siloing around wildfire resilience policy. So a lot of folks talked about that need for coordination across various sectors: housing, agriculture, public health, infrastructure, land use planning, housing policy. And again, some of these are not things that work is trying to tackle, but I thought it's worth, bringing forward. These are things we hear as being of interest and needed. Something that came up is, it's maybe not explicitly policy, but it's the wildfire crisis strategy. We just heard a lot of conversation around. It's really important that it has prioritized the places it has with lives and property, but also other, folks from across the state have also said it also misses some chances to really think about other values at risk, including values that actually affect those front range communities. So in terms of water supply and things like that. So that's just something we heard about and flagged. And so some of the solutions we heard, supporting appropriate NEPA streamlining, developing state good neighbor authority and stewardship agreements with federal land managers, creating frameworks that facilitate cross-boundary work, and streamline local collaboratives' ability to work with federal partners locally, supporting liability reform for prescribed fire, and pursuing the prescribed fire recommendations from the Colorado Prescribed Fire Strategy, increasing coordination of wildfire resilience policy across sectors, considering some additional priority areas, including those critical for water supply and other values, engaging a broader set of leaders in advancing statewide policy initiatives. That's where we hope work can provide a really good forum for maybe getting more people interested in participating, whether it's in federal or state or local initiatives. Exploring strategies on affordable homeowners insurance, that came up a lot. Again, we know some other fora are taking those questions on, and that's less of the focus for work, but we see it as really important. We do have the insurance industry also at the table with work, because we all see the connection of the work we do with risk reduction can then also hopefully help with some of these insurance challenges, and also help with resilience and recovery on the back end. And then finally, this wasn't explicitly in our scoping document in this section on policy, but it's kind of really implied throughout, which is there are obviously policy opportunities really specific to sustainable funding, investment in workforce and capacity, et cetera. So, any policies related to those other strategies we're working on are of strong interest. So that's what I had. Thanks. And Jody, Commissioner, I saw that your hand was up. So we'll go to you, and really just wanted to leave the rest of the time. Can't wait to hear as well what you're all working on. Really, that's my question for you, is what do you think is coming up? And are there ways that this work effort you feel, could potentially provide a good nexus and opportunity to just kind of, broaden the tent of support around initiatives that may be really important that you've identified? So I'll stop, and I can stop my share unless you need to see other slides.
Thank you. And I have a few questions, if that would be okay. And everyone should raise their hand. It's not a large group today, but I'm sure there's some, we all have some great questions. And Julie, I know we worked together with NOCO Places and all of that work. And so it's really been great to start another area of work with you. So thank you. So first, the slide back, you don't have to pull it back up, but the slide that you talked about, the FEMA, the $1 in mitigation goes to $6 in reduced damages and cleanup costs. But I know there's a 2024 study from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Commerce Foundation that talks about also that it might be a $13 return in cost savings or reduction of cost, because it preserves economic impact, like overall jobs, income, disruption. And I'm wondering if that also needed to be kind of, especially if we're partnering with private entities, showing that it's the suppression and the cleanup recovery costs, but also there's an economic benefit of disrupting those costs. And so I'm wondering about showing that 1 to 13 as well, or adding that 1 to 7 to make it a total of 13. And what are your thoughts on that? That's my first question.
Gosh, I'd love to. I need to look that number up. I admittedly hadn't heard it before, but I think what you just described actually captures a lot of the genesis of this effort, which is that it's not just about the costs of firefighting and recovery. It's about disrupted workforce. It's about, disrupted economies. People can't recreate where they were going to recreate, or maybe they hear there's wildfires and they just don't even want to bother to try. And so there's, and that we highlighted in that December luncheon, just even like disruptions to hospital systems, like there's so much. And I'm guessing, without digging in, that's part of what that study might reflect, is that difference of it's not just the costs we usually think of wildfire, it's all these other impacts. And that's why we really want to help more sectors see themselves as both beneficiaries of risk reduction and also impacted constituencies if there was a fire. So
yeah, and I just wanted to kind of highlight a little bit of that. And forgive me, team, if I'm monopolizing the beginning of this. I apologize. I'm really excited about this. It's really important. So I put one of those sources in the chat, but for instance, also the impact not only to businesses and tourism and especially these gateway communities like these mountain towns like Estes got evacuated, or the floods, the fire, Alexander Mountain Fire. You know, it's a 5-year anniversary of commemoration of Cameron Peak, but we had Alexander Mountain Fire a year ago, and we had to shut down our open. It was like one of the biggest times for us to have we have 2 of the most visited reservoirs in the state, Horsetooth and Carter Lake, and those were shut down to fight this fire that was 50-50 to become another massive multi-month fire. But we had to shut it down because we were using the reservoirs to fill up the planes and the helicopters, which were so critical for ending the fire so quickly. And so there was a huge impact to that from the lack of revenue, but also we had to take all of our rangers and shift all those costs over to helping cover and shut down the reservoirs, is because we had all the sheriff's office trying to maintain all that. So I just think that's another important thing to think about, is not only impact to businesses, but local governments as well. When we have to, there's disruptions, and that's why we put in almost every employee's job description is during natural disasters, they have to, they're kind of can be shifted to doing that kind of work and helping back that up. Because when it comes to FEMA reimbursements and things like that, if that's not in their job description, if they do some work, we can't recover some of those costs because of all these policy things. So I think that's another policy thing to look at. If I don't know if every county does that, but we've run into that. If we didn't have those in those descriptions for those employees, we would not be able to reimburse them those costs. And when we can't reimburse those costs, especially now in these budget times, which I'm trying not to read the play-by-play from the special session right now, but it gets to be really hard to do things like mitigation work, and we fund it in our county. So that's my, so I just wanted to share that with you, and thank you and if you would explore that, I'd love to hear what you think about that. And then the next thing, I am on that prescribed fire subcommittee. We met yesterday, and Allison, thank you for your patience. I was trying to do 4 things at once, but I hope you could hear me okay. But I actually got to go up and do some mitigation and restoration work in Rocky, and it was my only morning to be able to do that. And then I got called down to testify, and the special session, and I sat for 2 hours and never got to testify, so I was a little cranky about that. But anyway, that's not their fault. It was a little bit of a technical difficulty day, but one thing we talked about with those in that meeting, and Allison, correct me if I didn't hear this correctly. It was great to plant seedlings as I was listening to everybody, but there is also a disconnect, or maybe we need to explore when we have the burn bosses in certain organizations who are covered for some of these prescribed burns. Does it also, how is that liability and that coverage? And you had brought that up on the slides earlier about liability and coverage. We're looking at exploring and trying to get some more clarification from folks with legal advice, and I'll just be general there. Is it cover the funders? So in case, organizations, private entities or nonprofits, does it cover them? Does it also cover other partners and nonprofits that are involved, or is just the burn boss? And so it's something to kind of look at, I think, as a bigger picture, to how we can help folks feel not so much at risk to do the work because we have to mitigate all this stuff first before we really start doing these more landscape, kind of what I call beneficial burns or beneficial fire and land, how we live. We're rooted in fire, and just like the grasslands in Nebraska has a wonderful documentary and series called Rooted in Fire in Nebraska Grasslands. And so I'm wondering about, is that something you're looking at when you look at those prescribed burn recommendations? And Allison, did I cover that accurately? Because that really stuck in my head from yesterday.
Yeah, I think you did a good representation of that. And the prescribed fire subcommittee, though, and the whole strategy, one of the big tasks or actions is to keep digging into essentially the liability of non-agency folks, not just, agency and non-agency folks being able to put fire on the ground, and how they can get coverage, right, when they're in those situations. So I think you did a good job, Commissioner.
Thank you. and sometime when we have time, I'll sit down and share with all of you. We had the Cameron Peak burn commemoration up the canyon. There are a lot of side stories, but hearing from the U.S. Forest Service fellow and our emergency services team, because we're only one or two or three counties in the whole state where the sheriff is the fire warden, so we can respond very quickly. And then all sheriff's departments, but we have emergency services, but they told their stories from the Cameron Peak that day and how much it just blew up so quickly. And so it was great to hear those stories. So I'll do this last question and let others share. You know, I'm a local control gal. What works for Larimer does not work for Denver. What works for Denver does not work for Larimer. What works for my friends down in La Plata County does not work maybe for Larimer. Every county is different, has different landscapes, different conditions, different social capital, all these things. And so when we talk about all this work and local efforts, everyone's in a different spot. And so when we're trying to coordinate and partner, how do we help enhance the work that some are doing? And how do we help empower and boost the work that others are trying to get traction on? And the reason that I'm asking that is so that we kind of help. I hate to see things slow down because we all have to get on the same page. We're saying, how do we help elevate everyone in different ways at different times to kind of get moving? And the reason I say this is that we're finally, sorry, I'm looking at a baby bear in my backyard. Yay. I have three of them, 3 cubs. So because right now we're trying very hard. We have our woody biomass study. We have their wildfire defense grant. We have a drop in the bucket of 9.7, but we're also trying to open our new landfill, which will have hopefully built this kind of circular economy for woody biomass. And I'm working very hard right now to get a wildfire sales tax, along with our DNR on to do this work, to do kind of a buckets of grant matching and other things. And we're talking about that with TNC and Trust for Public Lands and some other groups, and trying to share with my colleagues how important this work is. But we have all these competing priorities, but this is really important for our watersheds and our air quality and things. So how do you see this, what you're doing is because it is hard, but I hate to see kind of a blanket policy that comes down and has everyone doing the same approach, when I feel like it's really going to be hard for everyone to have the same approach because they don't have the same partners or resources or things that they've been working on for years. I hope I'm clear on that. That question. I'm just trying to figure out how, because it is complex. Thank you for listening.
Yeah. I mean, I would emphasize first that work isn't trying to create a blanket approach. I mean, the different strategies I highlighted are meant to offer a lot of diversity and opportunities and just ways of thinking about, how to do local funding, how to support private-public partnerships, how to support forest restoration economies. But I don't think anyone thinks that that's going to be a statewide, formula or recipe. On the statewide funding, that's probably the one strategy where it is looking at like, how is there an opportunity statewide to have raise more funds to go into these programs that often then go down to the ground and people apply them in their own ways on the ground. So from the local funding perspective, just as an example, again, part of it is looking strategically statewide at thinking about where opportunities are and where priorities are, and then how people might want to engage locally, but then it's providing those opportunities on that frame so that people can see, where some different options could be and how they could plug in and how they could partner with folks who have done things locally in other places. For private public, same thing. It's like there's just going to be different opportunities in different places. So what's the menu, and when do different things work and not work, and what can we share and learn together? And same with the economy questions. There was one other thing I want to say. Just give me a moment because I see Christina's hand up too. On what was I going to say? It slipped in and out. Place-based collaboratives, right? Of course. So we know, the collaboratives network plays such a huge role in bringing folks together to share what they're doing and learning. And we know everyone's in different stages of readiness, and there's those great resources now around, what to think about at different stages. From the local funding initiative perspective for work, like that's another place where we're thinking about how do different funding opportunities tie to where you're at and what you need and different stages of readiness, and how could you think about, matching up opportunities or for those who are early, and just trying to plan versus those who are ready with the shovel ready projects. So those are things we're trying to look at too, and we're working with the local the Forest Health Collaboratives Summit, in terms of what they're going to be doing. And I guess it's just a few weeks now of supporting conversations about these different kinds of strategies too. So I think we're absolutely aligned that local communities are going to have different needs and desires. So it's about statewide, just giving a view and a coordination opportunity for folks to learn about what some of those opportunities could be.
Thank you.
Yeah. I see Christina's hand.
Yes, Commissioner, is it okay to address your question that you asked Julie? I have some thoughts about that and just my participation in the work group.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate your participation, and I'm learning more about this, and I will really be there only partially on Monday. I'm going to join you all, and I'm bringing a staff member who is working with me like we're shoulder to shoulder on this, and so just wanted to just share that just Mondays are so hard with trying to, I'm getting used to 15-hour days on Mondays and Tuesdays, but it's just too much happening on those days. But yes, please, I'd love to hear what you have to say, Christina. And both of you, I just hold you in high regard, just so you know that I'm just super excited that the people working on this and who are at the table, I'm just really thrilled to see. Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to recognize, I think, that dynamic of like, there are very unique needs at the local level. And I would even say, so that dynamic is always, I feel like always there when these collaboratives and initiatives form, even amongst the partners. I think, the priorities are aligned, but they may be a little bit different in terms of like the partners' prioritization. So a real life example of that is like for the water utilities. Let's say, their interest is very much focused on landscape resilience, watershed health. That will a lot of times align with community protection. Sometimes I would say, there's flexibility on the partner's behalf. I think acknowledging the importance of being opportunistic and working together to bring more resources, even though sometimes priorities for those partners may be a little bit different. Sometimes they compete. I think that's something that, being in this space, recognizing that bringing resources kind of at a broader scale, like a state level scale, would benefit all. But if you really get down to funneling those resources down to the ground level, the local level, I mean, there's competition for those things. So I think that dynamic, while it's not going to go away, I think that that's one thing that's really unique and special about forest health and kind of watershed health collaboration is there's a recognition that even though at the local level we're very focused on those needs at that scale, but that working together, that brings greater resources that would be available to those folks. But I just want to recognize that priorities may be different for folks at the table, and sometimes that's a really uncomfortable discussion when these things form. Is, are we focused on the watershed? Are we focused on buildings? Are we focused on, all the different aspects, because fire and forest health is such a big, complex problem. So flexibility and opportunistic is those are like the two things I always kind of keep in mind when we have different folks coming to the table and things could be, I don't want to say in direct competition, but just people have different priorities.
Thank you for recognizing that and saying that. I was trying to gently say that because but I guess I'm a different animal sometimes. There are times as a county and when we were advocating for policy, there's some smaller counties like, we need this passed. Can you, and it doesn't impact us, but I still go testify on behalf of them because I know that helps them with what they need to have happening. And overall that helps our whole state but be better, right? And so sometimes you have to come out and see it as a state, we get all these lines as a state, this is going to help us overall, but also just want to make sure that we're, help that some folks and some counties, and we know all those counties that have been, as I call, working to save ourselves, that they also still get some thoughts, but also the ones that are just trying to get the traction. They see where they need to go, but just trying to get that traction in a landscape that doesn't have as many resources. But I think also I appreciate the comment about that uncomfortableness about the competition or maybe competing priorities, because I think that's where we're at right now in so many lands, in so many areas throughout the state and then now the nation. And I think if we don't sit in that discomfort and talk through some of those things and recognize that and speak it out loud and talk about we recognize that, we're not going to progress forward. Because if we try to make sure we don't, there's an elephant in the room and we don't want to talk about it, but we have to. And I think that elephant, if we just, take it, they always say a piece of an elephant at a time, but instead, how about we just address the elephant and try to get the elephant to work with us? But I appreciate you bringing that and stating that the way you did, because that's kind of what we're feeling right now with this week with all of the competing priorities. And last night was on full display, you're trying to tell me which limb to cut off, and I need all my limbs. So which one, right? I mean, I hate to be that dramatic, but that's what it felt like. And so I appreciate your comments, and I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
And if I could just add, because so Christina and I have been part of the work group probably at the same time, I would say. We weren't, maybe Christine, I wasn't there from the beginning, Julie, but we came in about a year ago. And I think of this work effort as the umbrella that we're missing a bit in the state, with a focus on how to put the pieces together for alternative funding. I love what you are saying, Commissioner, and appreciate your response, Christina, about the competing priorities and the differing needs that are going to exist across the state. And what I hope we're going to continue to do with work, and Julie, I want to say thank you for your presentation. I can't wait. I just love working with you, and thank you so much for guiding us and leading this effort. My internet just glitched too, so great. But is that it's evolving. So the thing about what we're doing is each time, so on Monday, I get so excited. I'm getting so excited because the door is opening a little bit more. We've got a pretty intense and wonderful action team that meets continuously to ensure that we're actually these 4 priorities that Julie put out there are these larger umbrella priorities. And so it's not that we're not getting into the specifics. The specifics are there. And we know, we know, a lot of us in the room, and especially the Christinas and Allisons and Scott Woods that are sitting at the table saying, oh my gosh, we're here with the counties and the collaboratives and all of that. But what we really need is to gain the trust and the buy-in from folks that aren't in this space yet, right? And so it's really exciting. It's really exciting to keep this momentum going. And I can see as we work to as we diversify our funding, and as we work to make this uncertainty of funding and federal space especially feel a little bit more comfortable for Colorado. I think we will eventually get down to the specific needs of everyone. So I sometimes see us up here in the best way possible because we have this group that really is focusing on, wow, we need more funding and we need sustainable commitments, not just from agencies and our amazing water providers, but from others as well with deeper pockets.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess, Allison, I think that just that point you made towards the end was really important, is that I think work is assuming that a lot of that prioritization will happen through those local collaboratives and at the local level. And so it's trying to just take that broader view of no matter what those priorities are and how they shake out in local conversations, we still need sustainable funding and more funding to actually be able to address them. And that's kind of where we're trying to play at.
Oh, Julie, you're muted. Oh, we can't hear you, Julie.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Oh, now I can.
Oh, good. Okay. Excellent. Better? Okay. I must have a delay. Sorry about that. I wrote down a lot of questions and I'm going to try and hit them succinctly if I can. Maybe my first question in reverse order of I'm going to shut off my camera because it looks like I'm lagging. There we go. Hope that's better. I guess my first question, based on something Allison just said, was, Allison, you mentioned, there are folks who are not in the room yet that work is hoping to engage. And I guess my first question was, who are those? Who are those people who are, whether they represent a specific, element of external stakeholders, who isn't in the room that you'd like to be? And maybe dovetailed with that, my other question is, what level of engagement do you have from non-water utilities? That's my second question. And then I'm just going to hit you with my questions and let you respond to them as you can. My next question was, how does the group factor in work that may be taking place? So, for example, just coming at this from a utility space perspective, non-water utility, when utilities put in place, so for example, using Xcel Energy, for example, a wildfire mitigation plan, right, at the state level with the PUC, does the organization sort of look at that plan and the tools that will be implemented by the utility across the state and say, there's some tools, there's some opportunities. How do we factor those in to the needs, to how we offset some risk so that priorities can shift to other work that isn't being done? I'm just flagging that maybe as an opportunity. And then I think my last question, sorry, my handwriting is horrible today. I guess the last thought I had, more in reaction to what Commissioner Shattuck McNally was talking about, and Christina, the computing priority piece. We see that a lot in the utility space, right? As we're coming through different communities across the state, what a community cares about at the local level can be dramatically different, even in neighboring communities, right? And it's not lost on anyone that funding is always a concern, particularly, I think, in recent years. What we are experiencing as we go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction at the local level is really hearing and seeing jurisdictions in the funding aspect relying on their legislatively enabled tool for impact fees as development comes through their area. So where my personal experience ties to those impacts, related to utility infrastructure, I see this as a tool at the local level that could tie in to help offset impacts for other types of development, so non-utility development, right? And it's always tricky because with any development that's coming in, you can certainly appreciate the jurisdiction is trying to balance the need to impose or the desire to impose some sort of impact fee on a developer, how that impacts, they want the development for economic development purposes. If you impose too much of a fee, that could chill the development, but imposing the fee enables the local jurisdictions to apply those funds in their very unique and individual way to offset concerns and risks that they have. And so just kind of thinking about all of that, I see these impact fees being utilized in a very specific way, but I am curious whether they are actually utilized more frequently on other development where I can appreciate the developer in the room may not be a Fortune 500 company, but how, are the local jurisdictions using that tool to the greatest extent possible in a thoughtful way to help raise the funding from a source that is looking to impact the community, maybe shift the risk profile to the community if you're building 2,000 new homes, right? And maybe thinking about how that impact fee can be utilized to support fire departments, to support any mitigation work that needs to be done, at a local foresting level. So that's maybe just an observation to share, where I don't know how much folks talk about that, but it's a big part of my day to day. So it's something that I recognize. So those are my thoughts, comments, reactions, and maybe I should have led with thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the information today, because this is something that I don't hear a great deal about. And so for myself, while I may not be able to actively participate, I am curious if non-water utilities aren't engaging in this space, if there's something we can do to help them engage in this space. So we'd be happy to talk more about that offline if that's beneficial. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I'm going to try to take your first question a little and then maybe ask Allison and Christina to help on those other questions and your first question, because I'd love to hear their perspectives. And so your first question was who's not engaging and who isn't in the room that we'd like to be, and what level of engagement do we have from non-water utilities. So just by the numbers, I think we have 40 or 50 organizations now somehow affiliated with WORK, and I think right now just 4 of them are water utilities. So to be clear that, some of the water utilities really, help to catalyze this. I think we could use more water utilities coming to the table and thinking about this too, in addition to other players. And we do we have been outreaching with some of the energy folks, including Excel, but could use more of that too. More generally, I think it's just, to Allison's point, there's who are the unlikely characters. We do have a bunch of folks who are usually involved in the space, but we're bringing in maybe NGOs that typically haven't been as specifically involved in wildfire. We're trying to think about businesses. We've outreached, to chambers and hospitals. And I think folks have different interests and ways of engaging. And for some, it's like when you have a specific ask, let us know. Or when you're down in my community, let us know. But we're thinking about businesses. Rec industry, Samantha's online, and we would like to get the rec industry more involved in thinking about this for sure. That's just scratching the surface. But I think, again, one example we've had Lockheed Martin come to some of our meetings, and not to pick on them, but I think it's awesome. They're thinking about innovation and technology for wildfire detection. And they also, are the ones who build helicopters. And there's all kinds of ways in which there's a lot of folks that have nexus to these industries, but maybe aren't always part of these broader conversations on sustainable funding and policy and things like that. So, so we're really just trying to have that big tent of those who we really think are connected and connect by, contribute to solutions for, and can be impacted by wildfire, but maybe just don't usually sit at the table. So that's my answer to the first question, but Allison and Christina, do you want to add answers to those first questions? And then also the ones on the mitigation plans and the utility fees. Those are great questions / comments, Julia, that I'm digesting, but Allison and Christina probably have more substantive knowledge on.
Well, I just want to add on and Christina, I'll pass it to you. As far as who's maybe not as well represented at the table, Julie hit it from the recreation side. We've got we've had some people on our list that we've invited to some of our leadership roundtables that we were hoping will attend, the ski industry and big rec industry. And we won't stop inviting them, of course, but I think that's a key sector that we want to have. Go ahead, Christina.
I was just going to say, I think industry, like timber industry, we have the Colorado Timber Industry Association at the table. We have I know, and I know there's been a lot of outreach, and it's just tough to get those folks. So just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, one of the reasons I asked is because some of the players and the folks that you do talk to, right?
Julie, your microphone dropped off. I'm having trouble hearing you. I don't know if others are too. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm having trouble.
It's my camera. Is that better?
Not really. I'll bump up my speakers so I can hear you better, but
Okay, no worries. I'll be quiet.
Better.
I'll just let you finish.
that's better. That's better
Better?
actually. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. It's on a weird delay. That could be a Google Meet delay thing on my side for security purposes. What was I saying? One of the reasons I was asking, right, is just, again, sort of the whole networking piece, right? I mean, you may be reaching out to Vail Resorts and others, and they may be going, yeah, we're busy, and, thanks you for the invitation, etc. Sometimes if they hear the why they are really needed at the table and how this benefits them, frankly, financially, like what is the incentive for them to bring their brain power to the table? And many years ago, I used to work for Vail, so I understand how small they are and how busy they are, but really helping them understand why it benefits them to come to the table and where there's, future marketing power in their participation and reputational enhancement by their participation, I think can tend to be very powerful for organizations like that, who may be stretched thin in the manpower space. So to the extent it helps to have others join in the ask outside the organization itself, I would just encourage maybe casting a wider net of folks who are making that outreach so that they understand how this may be extra beneficial for them to come to the table and lend their thought to the effort.
Thanks, Julie. Just to add on, because I'm in the notes that Courtney is taking, so I can remember your questions. For your second question, how are we factoring work that's maybe taking place outside of this group? And you used Excel as an example, and it's been really. I'm going to just highlight a conversation that we just had at our leadership roundtable a couple of weeks ago. I think that was in July, Julie. I can't remember now, but maybe a month ago. But Holly has been at the table since the beginning with Excel, and it's been really wonderful hearing her insight and just, for example, Excel's commitment, to Colorado and to this, big plan that they put forth. And what's amazing to kind of have these. And it's not, I don't want to describe it as like this open forum, but when we all come to the table together, I'm actually not at the middle table, I'm sitting at the sides, but when we have the leadership roundtable together, you have this, there's this opportunity for everyone to sort of sink in, kind of like to the question that you just posed, like what's going on outside of this table, or how are we incorporating other people's efforts? And so in this last meeting, State Forester Director Matt McCombs was sitting with Troy, and they were talking about the work that they believe needs to get done within the state, and the mapping and prioritization that has happened, not just for forests but for watersheds and communities. And they were you know, when you hear Matt McCombs speak and be in these situations, he's so wonderfully confident and excited to continue this work. He's like, we've got the resources and we know where to go. And then, you know, Holly responds with like, right before that, Holly's like, well, I have money, right? Like, you know, so Holly's like, this is so great because like maybe Excel's sitting there saying, well, we now have an opportunity to fund things and fund areas that are good for them, which equally could be good for the rest of all of us as well, and our communities and our shared priorities. So I think there's just this opportunity. That's why it's so nice to be in person, I would say, and to really continue to work on these conversations together, because organically, we're just going to keep learning more and more about what else is happening, and then trusting each other as well, right? And this is a statewide effort. We're not, I mean, work itself. I mean, Julie, I hope I can represent that well. Like this work group is we're thinking about the whole state right now. That doesn't mean that certain efforts may not, or potential funding opportunities or potential what comes from these conversations might be focused in different areas of the state. But I think it's just this continuation of trust and relationship building, and that's the way I see it. Christina, do you have any other thoughts on that, or your take?
No, I don't know. That was well said. Thank you, Ellie.
I don't know if all of Julie's senseless questions got answered, but I was wondering, since I have a meeting with some chamber leaders here in a little bit, and that article and that study was done by the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Is there anyone from the state level chambers in this conversation? The reason I'm thinking about this is, you know, our chambers are supporting our transportation tax that we just put on the ballot, because they recognize the need for, you know, they recognize how the funding mechanism works, and the counties just we're not funded to take care of 800 miles of road, right? And some of these roads are really important for ingress, egress, and you know, getting folks out in emergencies. And I'm wondering about, since that article came from them and they're at a national level recognizing the importance of mitigation work, is there anyone on this working group that are representing kind of the general chamber group? Because they would be able to talk to all businesses, and if they were behind this, I think that would bring a lot of other partners on board who might improve, I want to say improve, but even strengthen the social capital and maybe the efforts overall. I'm just curious about that. And I wanted to also say, Julie, great presentation. I can't wait to get the slides, and just thank you. I think this is a really great conversation, and I'm really glad we have this as our only items today. It's been really great to have this discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I can take a first stab at your question, but the conclusion is I think it would be great to engage more with the state chambers. That Denver Water Luncheon, and I think this is part of the power of just having different folks convening. We did have Colorado Concern and Denver Chamber and Colorado Business Roundtable, I think, was there as well. And then the Colorado Forum has been a really great connection to all of the above. You know, I think we're still trying to think about how to engage folks again with that message that was shared earlier around, like, this is why it's important for you to be at this table and it's worth it for you and I think that we need some additional attempts there. And so if you have thoughts, Commissioner, that's great. You know, one thing that I'm hoping can come out of Monday's work session is a little more clarity on like how to start going about more of that engagement. Again, it's been moving really quickly, but I think that especially in the private public funding piece, like being able to lay out, here's the right approaches and the right strategies and the right next outreach, and even just the right opportunities that you can match with different potential private industry, that'll provide more of a framework. And so I'll just say, like, you know, Samantha and I have talked about, like, it would be great maybe just that we need to go out to the rec industry and maybe work with OREC to say, like, let's have a focused roundtable conversation with them instead of expecting everyone to come to like the work session, right? And similar with chambers, I think, you know, and some of the private folks, and similar with some of the big businesses. We've talked about that with some of the ones that are at our table. So I just think we need to dig in more and engage folks on their own terms a little more too. That's my initial thought. I don't know if Allison and Christina have additional thoughts.
I appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I fully agree.
So I don't see any other questions. Any next steps? Or you know, I think you shared that, but you have the meeting. I'll be stopping by on Monday. Oh, Courtney, I see your hands raised.
I was just curious. I think there was this list of all these different strategies or tools that you were investigating or trying to implement. And is it mostly, is the information mostly coming from inside of Colorado, or are there other people outside of Colorado that are doing these things really well that you're trying to model off of? They seem just, you know, like also challenges and solutions that would be statewide or nationwide.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And yes, I mean, number one, we have a lot of folks involved in work who are also doing work in other states and are bringing those models from private, you know, sector engagement and funding to shared stewardship to policy and funding measures and things like that. I think we can always learn more. And I think that's another piece of it, is just trying to think more about those connections and how we can learn. So it's a yes, and I think there's more to be done. And I think when it comes to some of the more federal policy related things and policy and opportunities, you know, there is this open question of how can the work effort kind of engage and, you know, at least stay informed, but also engage as appropriate as in any opportunities around, you know, those conversations.
Great question. Okay. I think we're winding down with our questions and thoughts. Just last chance for anybody, and it's fine.
Yeah. I mean, Commissioner, you asked about next steps, right? So
Yeah,
I guess we can try to answer that. I mean, for work, our big next step is this big meeting on Monday, which will help define additional next steps for strategies and outreach, et cetera. I think that also, as just a requested open invitation next step, if there are things that the FHC and the legislative committee are kicking around from a policy perspective, as you think about policy recommendations for the upcoming legislative session, any opportunity for engaging work, you know, and at the very least the action team, you know, as a starting place and sharing this is what you're thinking about, and then thinking about how that broader umbrella might be engaged at any point along the recommendation to kind of implementation and introduction of policy kind of timeline, that would be great. You know, I think it's a great forum just to use as a sounding board as well. So if there's an opportunity there, we'd love to engage with it.
I think that's great. And maybe we need to circle back as a legislative committee after this other meeting, and maybe we share this with the other members that couldn't be here today, and maybe get some other perspectives as we're trying to maybe go forward and see what we can add. So I'm just curious about that as well. Would love to send this recording to those folks and see what we can do to help them maybe engage with this. So anyway, I don't know what you think about all of that. So, well, we're almost, oh, Julie, go ahead.
Yeah, so Commissioner, actually, just one more thing on those policies. I just want to also emphasize, although work is really focused on that sustainable funding frame and the strategies I mentioned, I actually think that nexus to, if you are looking at prescribed fire policy or things that maybe we're not as focused on, but we have a lot of folks who might be interested in, I just want to make sure it's clear, open invitation on any of the things you're talking about. That's where I feel like there could be a good, you know, complementarity of bringing in work folks who who are really interested in those topics. So just wanted to make that clear too. We're not only interested in the sustainable funding pieces in terms of the connection with this work.
I think that's a great point. And I also think, just again, back to the comments that Christina had made about having some uncomfortable conversations and some competing or competing priorities or competing interests. I think, building these communication lines and relationships and seeking to understand, to be understood. I think this is overall just a good strategy to make sure everyone understands the urgent need and the scope and scale of this crisis and how it does impact every single person in this state. So I think that's an important, if at all we get that kind of set in everyone's mind, I think that's a huge win. So in my opinion, but maybe I'm an optimist, but I'm hoping that kind of expands that understanding. So we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to see if you wanted to have any closing statements, Julie Shapiro. I've got two Julies. I hope you understand I'm talking to the Julie presenter. So thanks, Julie. Other Julie.
I just really appreciate the chance to meet with you all and hear your insights and questions, and hope it's just the start of a conversation. So thanks for that.
Allison, Courtney, and Christina, anything you'd like to add to close this? Because I feel like we probably don't have enough time for other discussions and we're missing a few people. So I was hoping that maybe we can get some final thoughts from you as well, since you've been intimately involved with these conversations. This is really exciting that you're connected to this as well for our future conversations.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, I think the State Forest Service is very much engaged, and I think that this will continue to be a priority for us and helping to support this group. And as far as just kind of like also committee related matters, we are scheduled, the State Forest Service is scheduled on September 5th, the next meeting for our presentation. So it seems like there's a lot of interest in more of the utilization side of things, especially with Mark Morgan. So James and I are coordinating a presentation with our wood utilization specialists for September 5th. If that sounds like a good idea, I think it would be, they're already kind of compiling things for this work, what Julie Shapiro was sharing about. So it would be not a heavy lift. And I think it would be of interest to the group. So just wanted to throw that out there for the next meeting.
Thank you for that. And I think, Courtney, can you remind me, we had to push back from, was it DNR? Who was it from? If this works for the schedule, certainly if it's timing wise works out to align that, I think that's a great idea, especially because Mr. Morgan has had a lot of questions in this area. So I think that's a win-win. So forgive me, I don't have, I had to switch back to my phone. I'm going to have to take my computer into IT. But is there any other items that we had already scheduled as speakers? Because I know you work hard to get those set in advance.
Yes, right now we do have the State Forest Service as the presenter on September 5th, DNR as the presenter on September 19th, and then in October, we don't have any presentations scheduled. So yes, Christina, you're right. You're on the calendar for the next meeting.
Okay, so that is the correct one. Okay, cool. I want to make sure that was the same one, because I thought, well, I think that's on there, but I didn't know if that was a different additional presentation. So this will be good. And so we just have to start thinking about the October one, but maybe after these conversations with from Monday and some of the things coming out of the special session or other questions as we're monitoring all this, we'll have some other ideas. So I'll look forward to September 5th. I know it's late, right after Labor Day, but I hope everyone will be there and it'll be great conversation. And Julie, you're always welcome back, and we appreciate your work and your insights. And I hope, I'm using the 1 to 13, but I do talk about, the kind of the division of that, but it is, so I don't know, I would love to, once you read that and have a chance to peruse some of that, I'd love to have, maybe if you want to let me know what you think about that. I'd love to hear your feedback on that. Because those are some of the numbers I've been using. So anyway, unless there's a burning need for any other items, Courtney, I don't think we had anything else we had to, that were time sensitive for today.
No, nothing
Great.
else.
Well, I'll give you back about 7 minutes of your day, which will be great. And thank you all for being here. This was a really great conversation. I appreciate each and every one of you. So we'll have a motion to adjourn, please.
I'll move.
Is there a second?
Julie seconded with her hand.
Great. Thanks, Julie. I'm sorry you're having camera or microphone difficulties today. I get it. That's why I switched back to my phone. Well, anyway, without objection, anybody opposed to adjourning? Great. We are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a lovely weekend. Get outside and please take care of yourselves and have a great weekend. I look forward to our continued conversations. Have a great day, everybody.